What if I told you a sitting African president nearly walked into a carefully orchestrated kidnapping plot? In 2023, Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traore claims he narrowly escaped capture when he declined what seemed like an innocent diplomatic invitation to Nigeria. The alleged trap, supposedly backed by French officials working with Nigerian authorities, wasn't just a random incident. It represents the latest chapter in a centuries-old pattern of external control over African affairs that most history books conveniently leave out. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this incident sent shockwaves across the continent. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. A routine diplomatic meeting between heads of state turned into an international incident when Nigerian President Tinubu invited Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traore for talks in 2023. The official reason for the invitation seems straightforward. Discussions about ECOWAS sanctions and regional cooperation issues affecting both countries. These meetings happen regularly in West African politics, with leaders frequently traveling to neighboring capitals for diplomatic engagement. Traoré, who took power in Burkina Faso through a military coup in 2022, initially viewed the invitation as an opportunity to address tensions with regional neighbors. Behind the official communications, something more sinister was developing. Intelligence reports later showed that French officials had established direct contact with Nigerian authorities to coordinate Traoré's arrival in Abuja. The communications weren't about meeting protocols or diplomatic niceties. They centered on security arrangements and detention procedures. France, which had seen its influence in Burkina Faso significantly diminished under Traoré's leadership, allegedly saw this invitation as an opportunity to remove a problematic leader who had expelled French troops and diplomats from his country. The tactical details of the plan revealed its true nature. Nigerian officials would first ensure Traoré's plane faced unexpected technical delays upon landing, creating a window of vulnerability. During this manufactured delay, the standard security detail typically provided to visiting heads of state would be temporarily unavailable due to logistical issues. In this security vacuum, Traoré would be detained and quickly transferred to French custody, likely on charges related to human rights concerns or international sanctions violations. The entire operation was designed to happen within hours, presenting the world with a fait accompli before any international response could materialize. What the planners didn't account for was Traoré's robust intelligence network. Former French military personnel who had aligned with Traoré's government intercepted communications between Paris and Abuja, including detailed security memos outlining the operation timeline. These documents contain specific information about the planned security arrangements, detention protocols, and the involvement of French Special Forces personnel operating covertly in Nigeria. Traoré's security team verified this intelligence through multiple sources, confirming that the diplomatic invitation masked a capture operation. Rather than directly accusing Nigeria or France of plotting against him, Traoré executed a precise counter-strategy. He formally accepted the invitation but sent a delegation of senior diplomatic officials in his place, claiming urgent domestic matters required his attention in Burkina Faso. Simultaneously, Traoré appeared on national television in Ouagadougou, the capital, delivering an address about national security that coincided exactly with his scheduled arrival time in Nigeria. The timing wasn't coincidental. It provided irrefutable proof he remained in his country while subtly signaling he knew about the trap. During his broadcast, Traoré presented evidence of the alleged plot, including recordings of intercepted communications and digital copies of security memos. Without directly naming Nigeria or France, he spoke about certain powers that continued to view Africa as territory to be controlled rather than sovereign nations to be respected. He emphasized that Burkina Faso would never return to a state of dependency, stating that the days when African leaders could be removed for challenging foreign interests are over. The revelation sparked immediate public reaction. Within hours, thousands of citizens filled the streets of Ouagadougou in demonstrations supporting Traoré and denouncing foreign interference. Social media platforms across Africa erupted with hashtags like Shush, Hands Off Burkina Faso, and Africa is not your playground, which trended for days. Political analysts across the continent began examining other recent diplomatic engagements through a new lens of suspicion, questioning whether similar operations had been attempted elsewhere. The trap set for Traoré represented something much larger than a single failed operation. It exposed the ongoing mechanisms of external control still actively functioning in Africa. The attempted arrest of a sovereign leader under diplomatic pretenses demonstrated how former colonial powers continue to view African governments as subordinate entities rather than equal partners in international relations. When African leaders challenge established power structures by demanding control over their resources or expelling foreign military bases, they face consequences ranging from economic sanctions to physical removal. Perhaps most significantly, the incident tore away the veneer of post-colonial independence that officially exists on paper. For decades, Western powers have maintained influence through less visible mechanisms: economic pressure, military cooperation agreements, and intelligence operations. The alleged plot against Traoré brought these shadowy networks into public view, creating uncomfortable questions about who truly holds power in Africa. As one Burkinabe citizen told reporters during the protests, "They left our countries decades ago, but they never stopped ruling from Paris, London, and Washington." The diplomatic trap that failed to capture Ibrahim Traoré succeeded instead in capturing something else: undeniable evidence that the struggle for true African independence remains unfinished. The trap set for Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just a power move, it was about something much more valuable hidden in the ground beneath his feet. Burkina Faso sits on substantial deposits of gold, making it Africa's fifth largest producer. The country also holds significant reserves of zinc, copper, manganese, and limestone. These resources haven't just attracted mining companies. They've shaped the entire political landscape of West Africa for generations. When colonial powers drew borders across the continent, they didn't divide land randomly. They carefully calculated where valuable minerals and metals could be found and made sure they maintained access through various political and economic arrangements. Traoré's leadership disrupted these long-established resource extraction systems that worked mainly to benefit foreign interests. After taking power, he began reviewing mining contracts with Western companies, questioning arrangements that left Burkina Faso with only a small percentage of profits, while foreign corporations extracted billions in resources. He pushed for higher royalty payments and threatened to cancel contracts that failed to deliver meaningful benefits to Burkinabe citizens. These actions directly challenged decades of economic relationships that foreign powers had carefully constructed and maintained. This pattern isn't unique to Burkina Faso, it's visible throughout the region. Niger, another country that recently experienced a military coup, produces uranium essential for French nuclear energy. France gets approximately one-third of its uranium from Niger, powering nuclear plants that generate about 70% of French electricity. Niger also possesses significant gold reserves and oil fields. According to S&P Global Commodity Insights, Niger is believed to be sitting on 1 billion barrels of crude reserves. When Niger's military government decided to block exports of uranium and gold to the West, following their coup, they struck directly at French energy security. The economic control mechanisms extend beyond just physical resources. The CFA franc currency system, created by France in 1945, continues to give France significant economic leverage over former colonies. Under this system, countries like Burkina Faso must deposit 50% of their foreign exchange reserves in the French treasury. This arrangement limits these nations' monetary sovereignty and creates financial dependence on France. When leaders question or challenge this system, they often face significant external pressure or worse. Traoré has spoken openly about potentially replacing the CFA francs with a more independent currency, another direct challenge to French economic interests. The outcomes of these economic arrangements are clear in the stark disparities across West Africa. Despite vast resource wealth, over 40% of people in countries like Niger live in extreme poverty. Communities located near valuable mining operations often lack basic infrastructure like clean water, reliable electricity, or adequate healthcare facilities. The billions in resource wealth extracted annually from these nations hasn't translated into improved living conditions for most citizens. Instead, the wealth flows primarily to corporate shareholders and economic elites in Western capitals. Military leaders like Traoré recognized this fundamental imbalance and began taking concrete steps to address it. Besides reviewing mining contracts, they implemented export restrictions on certain raw materials requiring more local processing before export. They demanded higher taxes from foreign corporations operating in their territory and sought new partnerships with countries like Russia, China, and Turkey that offered better terms. These actions directly challenged the established economic order that Western nations had come to depend upon. The alleged plot against Traoré follows a familiar pattern, one visible whenever resource control is threatened. Historical examples include the 1961 assassination of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo after he sought to use the country's vast mineral wealth for national development rather than foreign profit. Similar scenarios played out with Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah, who faced a coup after challenging existing economic arrangements, and Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, assassinated in 1987 after implementing policies that threatened Western economic interests. France's involvement in the alleged plan to capture Traoré relates directly to this history of resource control. The attempt seems like a desperate move to maintain access to critical resources and preserve economic systems that benefit external powers at Africa's expense. When leaders like Traoré implement policies that threaten these arrangements, the response often involves attempts to remove them from power, either through economic pressure, support for opposition groups, or more direct intervention. The trap wasn't just about removing one troublesome leader, it was about sending a clear message to all African leaders who might challenge the established resource extraction order. The underlying message: challenge Western economic interests at your own risk. This pattern reveals the true nature of many international relationships in Africa, where sovereignty remains limited by economic dependencies established during the colonial era and maintained through various political, military, and financial mechanisms. The real war happening across Africa isn't primarily about terrorism or ethnic conflicts that dominate headlines. It's about who controls the continent's vast resources and who benefits from their extraction. Until African nations achieve genuine economic sovereignty alongside their political independence, leaders who challenge established resource extraction systems will continue to face significant external pressure and potential removal attempts. The alleged trap set for Ibrahim Traore fits perfectly into a century-long pattern of foreign intervention across Africa. Since 2020, Africa experienced a remarkable surge in military takeovers, with 11 coup attempts recorded in just over 2 years. These political upheavals didn't emerge from nowhere. They represent the latest chapter in a troubled history of power struggles that began long before current leaders were born. The continent's political landscape carries deep scars from artificial borders drawn by European powers who never considered ethnic realities or historical relationships between communities. These recent coups happened against a complicated backdrop of poverty, ongoing armed conflicts, and economic systems that still favor former colonial powers. The statistics tell a troubling story. Africa has seen 222 coup attempts since 1946, making it the most coup-prone region on Earth. Even more revealing, 45 out of 54 African countries have experienced at least one coup attempt. The average African nation has faced 4 coup attempts since gaining independence, with Sudan setting the unfortunate record at 17 attempts. These numbers reveal something important. Political instability hasn't been random or isolated, but rather a consistent feature of post-colonial African politics. Foreign powers didn't just walk away after independence ceremonies. They maintained influence through various means, sometimes openly and sometimes through covert operations. During the Cold War, African nations became battlegrounds where the US and Soviet Union fought for influence through proxy forces and puppet governments. This external meddling continued long after the Cold War ended. The 2011 NATO operation in Libya offers a perfect example. What began as a humanitarian intervention quickly transformed into regime change that left the country fractured and unstable. That instability then spread across the Sahel region, creating conditions that continue to fuel conflict today. When democratically elected leaders challenged foreign interests, they often paid with their lives. Patrice Lumumba of Congo won a democratic election and immediately sought to use his country's vast mineral wealth to benefit Congolese citizens rather than foreign corporations. Within months, he was assassinated in a plot involving Belgian and American intelligence agencies. Documents declassified decades later confirm what many Africans already knew. Foreign powers would not tolerate leaders who threatened their economic interests, regardless of democratic legitimacy. More recent interventions show similar patterns. France launched military operations in Mali in 2013 to 2014, ostensibly to fight terrorism. However, these interventions coincided with French interests in securing uranium supplies from neighboring Niger and protecting established economic arrangements throughout the region. Security concerns became convenient pretexts for maintaining influence in resource-rich territories. French troops remained in the region for years after the initial intervention, creating resentment among local populations who questioned whether foreign forces were there to protect them or to protect access to resources. Leaders like Traoré understand this history and explicitly reference it in their rhetoric. Traoré appointed Apollinaire Joachim Kielem de Tambala as his prime minister, a man who worked closely with Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader from the 1980s, who was assassinated after challenging foreign economic interests. Traoré has expressed commitment to fighting imperialism and draws inspiration from revolutionary figures like Che Guevara. He positions his government not as something new, but as a continuation of the anti-colonial struggle that began decades ago. The authorities in neighboring Niger have openly accused France of plotting military intervention. They specifically claim French officials met with Niger's National Guard chief to obtain the necessary political and military authorization for potential action. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department actively coordinates with ousted Nigerian President Mohamed Bazoum, calling for his immediate release and restoration to power. These current tensions reflect ongoing external attempts to influence who governs these nations. Why does control over African nations remain so important to foreign powers? The answer involves three key factors: strategic locations, natural resources, and geopolitical competition. Countries like Burkina Faso and Niger occupy important positions in West Africa, a region critical for controlling migration flows to Europe and containing militant groups that threaten Western interests. Their natural resources power industries and technologies around the world, from uranium for French nuclear plants to gold, copper, and minerals essential for smartphones and electric vehicles. Additionally, as China and Russia expand their influence across Africa, Western powers grow increasingly concerned about losing access to these strategic locations and valuable resources. The alleged trap set for Traoré doesn't represent something new, but rather the continuation of a well-established approach to maintaining control over African sovereignty and resources. When African leaders challenge established economic arrangements or expel foreign military bases, they face consequences ranging from economic sanctions to coups and assassination attempts. This historical pattern explains why many Africans viewed the alleged plot against Traoré with knowing recognition rather than shock. The tactics might evolve, but the fundamental dynamic remains unchanged. External powers continue working to ensure African resources and strategic positions remain accessible to them, regardless of what democratically elected or revolutionary leaders might want. What happened when Ibrahim Traoré refused to fly to Nigeria goes beyond one leader avoiding capture. It represents a new chapter in the long struggle for true African independence. Traoré's actions, based on intelligence about a possible trap, showed that patterns of control established during colonial times continue today, just in more subtle forms. The incident exposed the ongoing battle for Africa's resources and political future. As more African citizens question the relationship between their leaders and former colonial powers, these kinds of confrontations will likely increase. The most important part isn't what happened that day, but what it revealed about who really controls Africa.